Welcome to First But Last, brought to you by the Wyoming Humanities. I am your host, Emmy DeGrappa. Wyoming is called the Equality State because we were the first to give women the right to vote. 150 years later, we wonder what Wyoming women think about the progress toward equality now. Let's find out, and thank you for listening. Today, we are talking to Maggi Murdock. She is a retired educator, administrator, and known as a pioneer at the University of Wyoming. Maggi received her bachelor's degree from Creighton University, and she received both her master's degree and PhD from Tufts University in Massachusetts. Welcome, Maggi.
Thank you.
And you're also from Wyoming. Tell me about growing up in Wyoming.
I am from Wyoming, one of those rare people, I guess. Yes, I grew up in Torrington, north of Cheyenne. My dad was from Sheridan, and my mother was from Torrington, and that's where I grew up. So I had that nice small-town background and experience, which I think was really good. We had great schools, great teachers, and it was just a place to learn about being free, walking around wherever you wanted to.
Right, and just enjoying the outdoors. Did your family spend a lot of time camping and doing things outside?
No, actually, we did not.
Oh, that's interesting.
We were town kids, yeah. We were town kids. My dad was a lawyer, but my mother never failed to remind us that my dad's clients were farmers and ranchers, and that if they didn't do well, they certainly were not going to hire a lawyer. But certainly in the spring, our whole family would go help with brandings, and those were kind of old-time brandings. You know, when the men and the boys would go out early, maybe 3 a.m, bring the cows and the calves in. Then when the women would come a little later with all the food, and everybody had to help in the branding. I mean, the kids, they just lined us up, or it might be, my dad would loan us out to some farmer, say, yeah, you need cattle moved before school. Yeah, my kids can do that. So we did some of that, but we were not campers, and we didn't do a lot outside. We did do some because my aunt and uncle were sheep ranchers out of Saratoga and Rawlins, and we got invited to their cabin in the snowy range, so we got to be outside then.
And after you left Wyoming to get your higher education, what drew you back?
Oh, Emmy, I wanted out of Wyoming so badly, and I always say I thought Omaha was an eastern city because it had more people than Wyoming, and it was clear across Nebraska, pretty far east. I'd never been that far, and I eventually did go to the East Coast for my graduate work, but and I loved Boston, but woke up one day and said, I just need to be in an open place. I need to be not around all these people and all these cars and all these buildings. And my husband said, great, where do you want to go? I said, I want to go home. And it was just that growing up, with that wide open space, much as I love the city, still love to go back, I just had to be in a place that wasn't so crowded.
I hear that a lot from people in Wyoming. We get really spoiled by wide open spaces and, clear starry nights and things like that you can't experience in other places.
Right. All the sunshine. I really enjoy sunshine, even if it's 20 below. We've got sunshine. And so, yeah, I think there's just something about it, when you're in New England, and I love New England. My grandmother and great-grandmother had come from there, and that's why I thought that I would probably live there forever, but you just can't see 30 miles down the road to where you want to go.
And so after you came back, so I was reading about you and reading in your bio that you had such a passion for education. Tell me about that.
Well, growing up, I always thought I was going to be a lawyer. My dad was a lawyer. I thought that was just what I was going to be. And in undergraduate school, I took a constitutional law class, and I think I realized then that I loved the law, but I didn't want to practice it. And so being able to teach it was just marvelous for me. But I taught a couple of years in Laramie while my husband was finishing law school. And then he got a job up here in Casper, and I thought, well, what am I going to do? But the university had opened its branch campus, UW Casper, in 1976. We moved up here in 1977. And I'll tell you where the passion really came from. I mean, I really loved the students I had in Laramie, but the students we had up here were what we used to call non-traditional. You know, they were probably 30, 35 years old. They had lives. They started college when they were young, and then life intervened. I remember the first night I came up here to do advising, and, you know, we had students lined up. It was a hot August night. We were in a room that didn't have any windows and up at Casper College, and a man came up. I thought he was older. He was probably, I don't know, 50, but he had this kind of yellowed piece of paper. And he sat down and he said, you know, I started college out of high school. And then he said, then the war came, meaning the Second World War. And then I got married, and then we had kids, and then my kids went to college. And he looked right at me, Emmy, and he said, and now it's my turn. And that dedication, that almost desperate yearning for learning is what just got me on fire to be an educator. So I think it was really the students who made me so dedicated, because they needed us to be there, provide them with a college education.
And I bet that is really rewarding to know that you're fulfilling someone's life goal, really.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it was. And, you know, sometimes we weren't that much older than the students, but we all enjoyed it. We all worked hard, the students, the faculty, the staff, and it was pretty exciting up here because we were kind of on that educational frontier. I think the university had decided that they needed to do education out in the state. They didn't quite know how to do it, and it was kind of a hobby for the university. Like, you all go out and do that, whether it was early distance classes or UW Casper, which is a branch campus officially of the university. And so they said, yeah, you go do this and you can keep the tuition that you generate. And but there wasn't a lot of supervision, you know. Nobody was paying attention to us because I think the feeling was the real university was in Laramie, even though we were university faculty and university students and university staff. So we got to do some pretty exciting things, you know, joint teaching of classes with people from different academic backgrounds, and it was pretty marvelous. We got to try a lot of things, and I really enjoyed it.
Did you see a lot of women returning to school during that time?
We did, and in fact, when this was first started, I remember being in a meeting, and at first the classes were during the day, specifically organized so that women, you know, take their kids to school, then we'd have class, and then they'd be ready to go pick up their kids. But it didn't take us too long to realize that that was kind of limiting. So we did most of them at night or on the weekends. And so we do like all day Saturday and all day Sunday classes for, you know, 3 or 4 weekends in a row, or we'd have class from 4 to 7 and then 7 to 10 at night, both with faculty here, and then early on, the earliest distance ed was we'd have some faculty from Laramie come up. We had a flying professor program. The university had that in the 70s, where they'd leave Laramie on the university plane at 3. They'd drop some people in Casper, pick some faculty up, and then they'd drop people in Riverton or Sheridan or Gillette, and then 10 o'clock they'd go back the other way and, you know, get people back to Casper or back to Laramie, wherever they were. But then in the 80s, we started with audio teleconferencing as well, like giant conference calls, and we had students all over the state. So, it was just pretty interesting. And we did have a lot of women. I think probably maybe 2/3 of our students were women, but we also had a lot of men who were students because we were offering classes, you know, when they got off work. And the same for women. Many of them had jobs and not just, you know, they weren't just stay-at-home moms.
Did teleconferencing change a lot of things about the ability for people to return to school.
Oh, absolutely. It really did, because we could go wherever there was a telephone. And there was a big the switchboard in Laramie. I've got pictures of it. People kind of plugging in like these old-time telephone operators, and they'd plug us in, and then we would get with our students. And I tried to go to every site where I had students. I remember one semester, I don't know, somehow the enrollment didn't get limited in my class, so I had a lot of students, probably 40 or 50 in 12 different places in Wyoming. So I was out almost every week to someplace. And it was interesting because I would always ask the students where they were meeting from. Here's a great story. There's a little tiny town in Wyoming. Not really a town, just kind of a wide place in the road. And I had two students from there. One was the chief of police, and one was the mayor. And during different times, the mayor might say, well, I've got a city council meeting or I have to do something, so I might miss part of class. That was fine. I remember one night the chief of police, when it was time for him to go over his case, it was constitutional law class, he was just out of breath. He sounded quite nervous. So I called him the next day and I said, that case, you knew it. Why were you nervous? He goes, oh, I wasn't nervous. He said, but I got a call. Someone had broken into the little post office. He said, I had to go find the guy, book him in, and put him in the jail, and then run back to class. And I thought,
oh, no.
There you go. That's small town Wyoming. But we also, in those days, there were Pell Grants for prisoners. So we had students from the penitentiary in our classes as well. And so it did provide just a lot of opportunity for people in these little tiny towns or bigger towns, or even people in the penitentiary who just really wanted an education. So we really felt like we were serving students statewide. And with our weekend classes, we'd have students drive from all over the state. And they'd come in on Friday night. We'd meet all day Saturday. We'd meet all day Sunday. And then they'd go home and go back to work and their families. But boy, they were dedicated for those 2 days.
That is dedication by you, Maggie. Those are great stories, actually. And who has influenced your work and your passion for teaching?
Well, I guess I'd really have to say the professors that I had in graduate school. Many of them, were quite well known as researchers. Some weren't. But what they dedicated themselves to was our learning. And that was something that was so meaningful to me. When you go to college, it's like you go to college because your parents expect you to go to college. And I had good professors. I can't say that I didn't. But it was that, just those faculty who really, really, really focused on each of us as individuals. We didn't have a big PhD program, and I was very, very lucky at Tufts. I remember getting a call in August in 1970 before I started graduate school, and it was a professor from Tufts, and he said, well, I have a couple of questions for you. And I said, okay. And I had just learned in a letter before that they had no financial aid for me. And I thought, oh my gosh, I can't go to graduate school. So at any rate, this professor said, well, we have an NDEA fellowship available. That's a National Defense Education Act fellowship. And he said, you have to tell me now whether you will accept it. And I said, well, what is it? And he said, well, basically they pay for all your tuition. They pay you a living allowance, and you're married, so you get a dependency allowance for your husband and your child. And I said, well, what do I have to do for that? Like teach? And he goes, oh, no. He said, you have to sign and have notarized a statement that you will go into college teaching, which I had decided I wanted to do. And secondly, you can never, advocate the violent overthrow of the United States government. And I said, that's all I have to do? He goes, yeah, we'll send you that form. So for 3 years, they paid for my education, but they really were just so thoughtful, and it was just so exciting, all these different classes. And so that's really, I think, what made me so dedicated. I watched how they taught us and how they cared for us, and that just kind of rubbed off on me.
Did you face challenges as a woman in business and in your career?
Yeah, it was interesting. In graduate school, I remember I had applied to be a teaching assistant in one faculty member's class, and he just told me, by then my husband was also in graduate school at Tufts. He said, well, I really have to hire Nick. And I said, well, why would that be? And he said, well, a man supports his family. And I said, like I don't?
Right.
But I remember, we ran a men's dormitory when we totally ran out of money, which is a whole different story, but 160 men in this dormitory. And I remember they'd ask me, they'd say, well, when you get out of graduate school, like if it's a job between you and a guy, you'd let the guy have it. I said, and why? He said, well, to support the family. And I'm going, I have worked as hard or harder than anybody else. Why would I give up a job just for that?
Right.
So I would say that my faculty did not treat me that way. They accepted all of us. When I came to the University of Wyoming, there actually were no jobs in the political science department. My husband was in law school, and so I was a secretary of the bank downtown for a year. And I got a call about the 1st of August after that first year, and it was the head of the political science department. And he said, Maggie, if you want this job, you need to come up here at noon and sign some papers. And I said, what's going on? And he said, well, we have somebody out on sabbatical, and I've hired 2 guys, and they both quit. Between May, one of them quit in May, one of them quit in July. He says, I got to have somebody to teach classes. Do you want to do it? And I said, absolutely. But I said,
that was a good break.
Yeah, it was. I said, but before I agreed to do this, what's the pay? And he told me what it was. I was making $300 a month at a bank downtown. He said, well, we're going to pay you $12,000. I said, what? And he said, yeah, $12,000. And I said, well, last year you had an opening and you hired a man. How much did you pay him? He said, well, I didn't pay him as much as $12,000. I paid him less. And I said, okay, fine, I'll take the job. But I did remember to ask that question because I thought, they might think they're getting, something cheap here.
Do you have any thoughts about the upcoming celebration of women's right to vote? And have you participated in helping women succeed? And I'm sure you have because of your profession as a teacher and a professor. But what do you think are the things that Wyoming can do to give women a leg up in their lives to succeed?
Well, it sounds like there's several questions in there. I'm excited about all the celebrations of women's suffrage. I haven't participated in any yet. I was not involved in the planning of that. What can Wyoming do? Well, I think the first thing we need to do is quit pretending that it's okay, that we don't have women in decision-making positions, that there is a huge wage gap. And we say, well, it's because of all the jobs in the energy industry. And I think we have to get over pretending that this isn't a problem. One of the things that I think Wyoming should realize is when we all are treated equally, that helps the whole society. And so one of the things that I've always tried to do as a professor is, encourage young women to go into different fields. And the other thing, as a university administrator, I always felt that part of my job was not just to run my little part of the university as well as I possibly could. UW-Casper, the branch campus, or all the outreach and public radio, whatever it was, I thought it was important to do that well. But also for whoever worked for me, I felt like we needed to be a place that encouraged people to learn and to grow so they could go off and do other jobs. They could move up. And so that's what I've tried to do, is help people in their jobs and in their education say, oh, I do have a lot of choices. And I think once we realize we have choices, whether we're men or women, I think we start knowing how to pursue those. And I think it's always a professor or an administrator or an older person's role to say, yeah, I can point you in a direction. I can talk to people and I could help you with that. So I may have helped a few people. I hope I have.
I'm sure you have.
Yeah, I think it's probably just caring about people.
Right, caring about people and caring about the person, like you were saying about your professors at Tufts, that they really cared about the individual, not just that you were a student in their class.
Oh, exactly.
So thank you so much for your time, Maggie. This has been great talking to you.
Well, Amy, I'm so pleased with this. I've listened to some of the podcasts, and I think it's a great idea. I think talking about women in Wyoming is a super idea. I think we're all in this together, and I just hope that we get, more women as decision makers. I think what the research would show, at least in companies, is that the more diversity there is among decision makers, the better decisions get made.
Thank you for listening to First But Last, brought to you by the Wyoming Humanities. Please join us again next week as we continue our conversations with women from around the state. You can also find us at thinkwy.org, where we continue the conversation on our blog about the history, journey, and the challenges of Wyoming's intrepid women living in the equality state. And if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the show and leave us a review on iTunes. Thank you for listening.